Hello, everyone. It's Tom here.
And I'm Chris.
And before we get into this week's episode, we want to let you know about a very exciting announcement, which is that we have a new sponsor for the show. It's very on brand, and it is Beckett's Gin. Beckett's is a fabulous gin company. It's got a brilliant range of gins, which we've been enjoying in the Spiked offices, and we're enjoying here today, Chris.
Very much so. I've been particularly enjoying the dry gin.
And we're having it as a G&T here, which is nice, but I'm told, although I don't do this myself, you can drink it straight and it's very smooth. You can enjoy it as a cocktail. Are you a fan of a cocktail, Chris?
Always love a cocktail, or just a G&T with a sprig of mint.
There's all kinds of options. Actually, on the Beckett's Gin website, they've got plenty of cocktail recipes for inspiration. Fantastic lineup of products there. So we're drinking the London Dry Gin, which is very nice. It's crafted with juniper berries from Box Hill in Surrey, mint from Kingston upon Thames, and an array of other lovely local ingredients, which is important to a discerning drinker like yourself, Chris.
Very much so, and distilled in London, England, the home of good gin.
Exactly. Another one of my favourites, certainly for what we've been drinking in the office in the past week, is the Slow Gin. Perfect, neat, or as a cocktail base. And if you like slow gins, you should also check out Beckett's barrel-aged slow gin, which is a new addition to the lineup, I'm told. It's essentially slow gin that's been resting in an oak bourbon barrel for 3 years. So all the aging process gives you wonderful notes of vanilla, caramel and coffee, 3 favourites of Chris Snowdon.
Haven't tried that one, but look forward to doing so.
Christmas is coming up as well, of course. So we've got the Beckett's Gin can make an absolutely perfect gift, not least because they've got this variety gift set. Includes 3 miniatures of all their main gins, the London Dry Gin, Spirited Gin and Slow Gin. So ideal present for a friend or a loved one, or even yourself. If you just
getting a litre for each of my children.
Poor things. Hopefully social services are kept at bay. But the best part is that as a Last Orders podcast listener, you can enjoy a fantastic 20% discount on all the wonderful products that we've just been talking about. It's really easy to claim your discount. Just go to beckettsgin.co.uk/last orders. That's beckettsgin.co.uk/last orders, all one word, for your 20% off.
It's one hell of a good deal, that.
It is indeed. Cheers, and let's get on with the podcast. Welcome to Last Orders, a Spike podcast all about freedom and the nanny state. In this episode, we discuss Rishi Sunak's smoking ban, the war on motorists, and why centrist Tories are the worst people in politics. Hello and welcome to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every episode by Chris Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Tom. Just enjoying my gin here.
Yeah, we should say this episode is brought to you by Beckett's Gin, which we're all enjoying here today. We're also enjoying the company of Patrick O'Flynn, political commentator. Second time on the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Patrick.
Hello there. You're really spoiling us with this Beckett's Gin ambassador.
It is actually really good, I think.
Excellent.
So
my favourite.
Go to beckettsgin.co.uk/last orders for your 20% off.
My tip is add some ice and tonic.
Pro tip for you there, people.
Really,
all sorts of... This is why you listen to this podcast. Another reason people listen to this podcast, Chris, is your campaigning against nanny statism. And it seems like Rishi Sunak is poised to really go there and to essentially phase out cigarettes, to introduce this policy which New Zealand have gone for, the Labour Party are interested in, which is to ensure that anyone born, I think it's 2008 or before, will never be able to buy cigarettes. The age will go up a year until that's achieved, and then also by a year annually until that's achieved, and also to reduce the nicotine content in cigarettes. We should say we're recording this on the Tuesday, the day before Sunak is going to give his speech. There's some discussion about whether or not he's actually going to announce it in that speech. So this might be slightly out of date by the time people hear it. But nevertheless, it seems to be an idea that's being taken seriously.
It's being mooted.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, as you say, we are speaking before the speech, so people listening to this will know what's actually being proposed. I've just come back down from Manchester, and the word on the street is that he is going to ban disposable vapes and introduce this New Zealand-style increase in the purchase age of cigarettes. Whether or not he does either or both of those, obviously we don't yet know, but both of these ideas have been around. And this incremental age thing was, it appeared in The Guardian a couple of Friday afternoons ago. And to be honest, I thought The Guardian was just being mischievous. It didn't have any quotes from anybody, even anonymously. I just thought this is a Guardian flying a kite on a Friday afternoon. But apparently it is being taken seriously. And well, I guess we should discuss it kind of seriously. So, I mean, to describe it is really to mock it and debunk it. To picture it's easy to go, well, at some point you'll get like 50-year-olds be able to buy cigarettes and 49-year-olds won't be able to. That's going to be ridiculous. Yeah, and obviously that would be ridiculous. But actually it would be ridiculous pretty much from the get-go, right? You just picture a group of first-year university students, some of them 19, some of them 18. This has just come in. The 19-year-olds can buy the cigarettes. The 18-year-olds can't. Straight away, it's daft. It probably breaches some equalities law. I wouldn't be surprised. In the long term, you probably need to have ID cards. If it really does get to the point where people in their 40s are not allowed to buy cigarettes and you have to prove, I mean, just imagine how hard it's going to be for retailers. Yeah. How old are you, mate? You don't look 42. You only look 40 to me. But what was your date of birth? And then they check a chart and go, okay, you're all right. Cigarettes. And the whole thing's ludicrous. Now, let's be frank, it wouldn't get to that stage. What would happen, I think, is you would get to the point where like 23-year-olds can buy cigarettes and 22-year-olds can't. And everybody would be saying this is silly. And the anti-smoking, the public health people would go, you're right, it is silly. If it's all right to ban 22-year-olds from buying cigarettes, it's all right to ban everyone from banning cigarettes. So let's introduce a level playing field. They love a level playing field, these people, when it comes to prohibition. And I think at that stage they would just it would be the final part of the long-running crusade. In New Zealand, they are doing this thing of taking the nicotine out, which actually just kind of makes everything else irrelevant, because once you do that, you've essentially...
Which I think has been floated in some of the reporting here. I'm not sure if that's actually what...
I haven't heard anyone seriously suggest it in this country. Interesting, Action on Smoke and Health are actually against this idea. They think it's daft. They're also, quite surprisingly, against banning disposable vapes. They don't think the government's going to get anywhere near this target of smoke-free by 2030 if you ban disposable vapes. There's over 1 million adults use these things. So you've got two terrible policies here. As I say, we don't know which is going to happen. But the smoking one seems, apart from anything else, totally absurd and impractical. I just don't think you could do it. Disposable vapes, you can ban them. But the problem there is all the panic is about underage use, right? And that's understandable. I've said before that it's not really on. You've got 11-year-old kids, getting on elf bars and so on. But it is already illegal to sell to kids. But the thing a lot of people don't realize is the products themselves, the vapes themselves that are being sold to kids illegally, are themselves often illegal. Very often the vapes themselves are not regulated. They've come in from China. What actually happened, and a lot of people don't realize this at all, China had introduced some quite severe restrictions on flavors in China itself. And so the Chinese vape companies ended up with a glut of products, which they've just essentially dumped on Europe. And so unscrupulous retailers can get hold of these. They can make an extra quid a go because they're not taxed at all and they come in cheaper. And that's what's happening. So banning disposable vapes isn't going to sort that problem out at all. All you can do is make the entire market black, and every e-cigarette will probably be illegal. And also, probably, almost certainly, in fact, more dangerous. You do find these heavy metals in some of these unregulated vapes. The EU regulations actually are pretty good when it comes to what additives and ingredients you can and can't put in. And you can put stuff in that genuinely seems to be dangerous. So it's a classic case of prohibition. You're going to make the health risks worse and almost certainly not deal with the underlying problem.
And that's been the issue with vaping in America, wasn't it? When there was all this concern about young people getting very ill or dying from vapes because they were all smoking or vaping black market THC.
They were, most of the time. And Australia is your object lesson as well, where e-cigarettes with nicotine never been legal, and they keep banning and banning and banning, and they ban imports, and now you can't get them in any form really, apart from a doctor. But the youth vaping rate in Australia is actually higher than it is in the UK. So prohibition doesn't work, Tom. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. This
recurring
is
thing.
Novel.
Patrick, on the smoking question in particular, what do you think about it? This proposed slow escalator towards a ban, and also, do you think this was inevitable as soon as smoking ban came in and all these different things?
Well, I would be surprised if Sunak goes ahead with this sort of ratchet mechanism, because I think the war, if everything's going to be described as a war, but the war on cigarettes has kind of been won. All the information is out there. The actual rate of people, each new cohort of brand new teenagers, they're all vaping, aren't they, instead of smoking cigarettes? So I would be surprised if you did that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something on vaping and disposable vapes, because it's a bit of a hot button issue for middle class parents of sort of young to mid teenagers. And, it wasn't so long ago that Rishi Sunak was posing as the sort of net zero hero because his daughters said to him every night, Daddy, they're killing the world, or all that sort of thing. But it turns out that his daughters, passionate advocacy of the existing net zero schedule, that seems to have fallen away. So maybe
they're now very concerned about LTNs or something.
They might be more concerned about vapes. But I can see it as a sort of soft, put it on Good Morning Britain with one of these concerned prototype female cabinet ministers, if I can risk putting it that way. A Gillian Keegan type person. I can see that they might have focus grouped that and it might work, and also that caring father Rishi Sunak might think it's a good thing to do. But I'd be very surprised if this, ultra hardline ratchet cigarette ban comes in, because it does seem to me, as Christopher explained, full of ludicrous problems.
And Chris, while you add more ice to your drink there, do you think the war on smoking has been won? And is that necessarily a good thing? Now, obviously, people have been turning away from cigarettes. I mean, this is an increasingly small portion of the population because everyone knows the health risks now, and that's all fine and good. But in terms of, no one's really challenged the authoritarian policies which have become just like muscle memory to the politicians.
Well, I have, but to no avail. A completely thankless, fruitless task.
The populist revolt against the smoking ban in pubs has never materialised, much to your chagrin. But
not really.
Has the war been won, as Patrick was suggesting there?
I mean, it depends what is the war. I mean, the war supposedly was against the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry is trying to lure people in various sinister ways to recruit this generation of smokers. And if we can stop the tobacco industry doing that, then, at that point, the implicit message from these people, and they're completely disingenuous and duplicitous, but the implicit message was people, adults, should be free to smoke. It's just we don't want kids being lured in. Now, once you have a ban on all advertising for 20 years and you have graphic warnings and the display ban on the plain packaging, there is no conceivable way you can pretend that anybody is being lured in and they don't know that smoking is bad for them, So in that sense, the war has been won. But the real war, of course, was wiping out tobacco use altogether, and indeed probably nicotine use in the long term. So no, that hasn't been won. So it goes on and on. I agree with Patrick. I don't think there's a great appetite for more anti-smoking legislation. I don't think that people feel there are still some obvious areas where the government should be intervening. They do on disposable vapes because there's a big panic about that. But I don't think there's that much appetite. And that's why I'm so surprised to hear that Rishi is seriously considering it. But from the anti-smoking people's point of view, you've got to keep yourself in business, got to keep the show on the road. So what's the next step, right? And I guess it's quite a clever way of going about it if you think about it, because smokers are only 13% of the population anyway, and they tend to be fairly disenfranchised people and low incomes. They're not going to kick up any kind of a stink realistically. But when you're dealing with people who are still children, the smokers whose freedom is being hampered by this policy, either haven't even been born yet or are still kids and can't vote and nobody hears from them. So I'm kind of used to sticking up for the rights of smokers. But with this, I find myself sticking up for the rights of the unborn smoker. The fetus who's saying, my body, my choice.
I feel like that framing could open up all kinds of cans of words. But I mean, it does seem that even if Rishi Sunak doesn't do this, I mean, he's not odds on to be the next Prime Minister. Keir Starmer is, and Wes Streeting has been very vocal, the Shadow Health.
Yeah, he started it. Yeah, again, Tories taking a Labour policy.
So it does feel inevitable. And of course, it was a Labour government in both New Zealand, which has introduced this policy. It's been it's been pretty consistent in Australia, but the new Labour government there seems potentially more zealous on these questions. But and Patrick, on the vapes question, I guess, is that another area you think they're going over the top? Because especially the single-use vapes has been presented as, well, of course, first of all, the littering argument is made, which is strange. It doesn't seem to happen in relation to anything else. You should ban McDonald's.
Well, it did with the laughing gas thing, didn't it?
It did.
That was the only precedent I can think of where arguably the littering thing was actually a bigger deal than the public health angle on it. Yeah, but obviously you can't just ban things that people drop on the streets.
Yeah. There's a simpler solution, surely. But also, the other thing that struck me is that people talk about vapes as if it's only children who do use them. And also being able to just pop into a shop and buy a vape in the same way you would go and buy a pack of cigarettes is surely quite useful for people trying to quit. It's not something where you have to have assembled your complicated bit of equipment like Christopher is tugging out here. But do you think the vaping thing is also a bit of a bridge too far?
I do. I mean, I'm someone who hasn't either smoked or vaped ever, but I've got a lot of friends who smoked and who now vape. And I was kind of generally going about my business thinking I'd read that this was much less harmful. So therefore, for those people, and they seem to have gradually become accustomed to it and drop the cancer sticks, as it were. So what's the problem there? That's a net benefit, I would think. So in terms of children, I mean, I don't personally get the scare story. Perhaps there is horrible substances and some of these things that kids are getting hooked on. You hear the odd worthy program on Radio 4 mid-mornings with, mums and dads ringing in and saying, I caught my Clarissa with, 24 packs of vapes or whatever, and it's taken over her life. Well, I'm skeptical about it, but I do recognise that it's quite a hot button issue, particularly among the middle class mums and dads. And Sunak, he's a bit of a hedger and a balancer, isn't he? And he might think he's going quite right wing by his standards at the moment. And if he wants to put a sort of caring bit of shade on his own speech, then it's something that might happen. But I can't say I've got massively strong skin in the game.
Did you see, just slight digression, did you see the guy last week from one of the public health organisations, can't remember which one, saying that the whole messaging from Public Health England on e-cigarettes had been a dangerous mistake?
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said this idea that e-cigarettes are 95% safer than cigarettes, that Public Health England and various other organisations since have been pushing, which is just true, right? It's just quite absolutely true.
Surely 95% is probably a little bit conservative.
At least 95% safer is actually what they said. He said they should never have said that. It's to send this message to kids that it's okay to vape. So essentially, this is a guy in public health, not surprisingly, he was implicitly in favour of the noble lie. He would rather not give people accurate information because he would like to scare people off vapes as well as cigarettes. I thought that was an interesting kind of
the mask slip sort of moment.
Yeah.
I said it before, but I think it's a damning indictment of Generation Z that the worst thing that they're hooked on is disposable vapes.
Yeah, they haven't even got the pathetic laughing gas to inhale.
No, exactly. Something's gone wrong. Before we get back to the show, I just want to remind you all about our very special live show, which we've got coming up on Saturday, 28th of October in Westminster. Me and Chris will be joined by Madeline Grant from The Telegraph and Patrick Christys from GB News for a special live edition of Last Orders in front of an audience. It's taking place at the Brilliance Battle of Ideas Festival, which is held at the beautiful Church House in Westminster. Listeners to this podcast can get 20% off their tickets, whether that's a Saturday ticket to see us or a weekend ticket to see all the panels they've got at the festival. We'll also be doing a live edition of the Spike podcast a bit earlier on the Saturday, so you really won't want to miss this. Just go to battleofideas.org.uk and use the promo code SPIKES when you get your tickets to get that 20% discount. That's battleofideas.org.uk and the promo code SPIKED. We should move on to another war, the war on motorists, which Rishi Sunak has made a lot of noise this week in saying that he's calling a halt to it. So following on from essentially the Uxbridge by-election where Labour kind of snatched defeat from the jaws of victory because of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ zone. He's also since pushed back the ban on new petrol and diesel cars and now has put a bit more meat on the bone to things he said previously about clamping down on low traffic neighbourhoods, 20 mile per hour speed limits, which of course Wales has just introduced. What do you make of this big push of his towards being the party of the motorists, as it were?
Well, I think it's useful electoral atmospherics. I mean, if you probe the detailed measures too carefully, you find there's not a lot there.
Yeah.
Like the electric vehicle ban not being 2030 but 2035, there are still intermediate targets, which I think, by 2030, the car industry is being told 80% of what you sell must be electric vehicles. So it's a bit of a minuscule step. And there are sort of those features about some of the other measures too. But on the other hand, you get the sort of the liberal, old-fashioned term, chattering class saying, oh, but the polls show that the move away from cars or whatever, or anti-car is popular. But, I'm very skeptical about that because if you go back a few years, people were saying trans rights is very popular, right?
Yes.
And the polling and people even like, libertarian Tom Harwood on GB News would trot out these polls showing allegedly most people were happy to say trans women are women or whatever, but no one in the governing party had ever made the case for the harms that were being done and for the nonsense that was being peddled. And, I sort of have the feeling with polling, a lot of the public know a pollster gets in touch, whatever, it's a posh person and the sort of things you're supposed to say to posh people in order to look smart, right? And yet if someone on the Conservative side makes, a passionate and well-informed case on an issue, the polls change extremely rapidly. And we're seeing that on multiple issues, including immigration, the net zero polling, the great platoon of pinko pollsters was sort of leading us to expect that would cause a Tory sort of to fall away in the polls, and it hasn't happened. So I think
the opposite's happened.
The opposite. So that's
the only poll that matters. Right?
Yeah.
Surveys on specific issues don't tell you anything.
No.
Ask people if they're in favour of net zero, they'll say yes.
Yeah. But who are you going to vote for given the policy? So I think that Rishi Sunak's onto something with this. He's onto something with his recalibration of net zero. Suella wading in with her talent for getting the hackles up of the liberal left is onto something on immigration policy. And, I feel that Labour is going to get very rattled and is going to discover that this sort of ideal progressive world of British public opinion that they thought they were living in doesn't really exist. So I think the war on the motorist, the smart people may mock it. We may be sceptical about the contents of the measures, but I think the atmospherics are going to be tremendously effective.
There's been a tremendous amount of bollocks talked about this issue on every side. I mean, the petrol ban for a start, bringing it from 2035 to 2030. The EU's target is 2035, and then probably not even going to do that. I don't think the Germans are even happy with 2035.
For obvious reasons.
You would think, Keir Starmer and so on would appreciate aligning with the EU on this issue. The EU's never got any grief from anybody about having a loose target at 2035, but suddenly we bring ours back to 2030 and Ford are going, oh, this is no good. Yeah, as if you weren't going to be selling cars to the Europeans for an extra 5 years. The war on motorists, they go, oh, there's no war on motorists. Well, again, Patrick, it comes back to what's a war. Maybe it would be helpful if we didn't describe everything as a war, But
makes a good headline.
Is there a war on motorists? Well, I mean, public transport is massively subsidised and cars are massively taxed. And there is such a thing as the ULEZ and some of these LTNs and various policies that are very clearly, not least the 20-mile-an-hour thing, very clearly designed to piss off motorists so they don't drive their cars anymore.
And the gaslighting on that one has been spectacular because you've had Wales introduce this policy where, again, I think it's the vast majority of kind of urban areas have now got this as the default, 20 miles per hour. So this is where the vast majority of Welsh people live. And then you've got Mark Drakeford saying, it's not a blanket measure.
Yeah.
You're lying. Yeah. So it's the most pedantic, ridiculous. But again, it's contributed to this kind of atmosphere, which is to say they're just making stuff up out of whole cloth just to appeal to a few conspiratorial nutcases on Twitter. Right. These things are actually happening.
They're happening, and he should be proud of it. I mean, he announced this a few weeks ago and said this is going to save lives. And most of the roads that used to be 30 mile an hour are now going to be 20 mile an hour. And some Tory describes this as a blanket limit, which I think is a perfectly defensible way of describing the default, which it is the default. And suddenly Drakeford's backing off from this. Go, oh no, it's not. It's only a few roads actually. There's 20 mile an hour. Hang on, I thought you were trying to save lives here, mate. What is it? And then the 15-minute cities thing. Now I understand that there is a lot of conspiracy nonsense around the 15-minute cities, absolutely, but the usual type of people on social media were coming out going, well, all a 15-minute city is, it's somewhere where you live and you can walk to the cinema and a shop and the GP and all this kind of stuff. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, yeah, I guess it would be nice, right? But that's not what the government's proposing. The government's not going to suddenly put GP surgeries everywhere and start building shops somehow. In practice, the 15-minute city thing is a fairly authoritarian traffic calming measure. Yeah. Right? It's been massively exaggerated in scale. But let's not pretend it's just some general idea of wouldn't it be nice if. It's not that. It is about restricting how much you can drive your car and therefore can fairly be described as part of a war on motorists.
And I think your point, Patrick, about how kind of out of touch the political class are on these issues is really stark when you take the motorist question. The vast majority of journeys in this country are taken by car. And that whenever these debates are happening, you basically get an array of London-based journalists talking about, well, I don't have a car.
Absolutely.
So therefore, I mean, is it as simple as
Why can't people in the rest of the country just take the tube like I do?
The Jubilee line's quite nippy these days. Like, it's just ridiculous. But is this just the successor to so many issues that we've had, which is that we do have a political class and a media elite which is so concentrated in one part of the country that they're just imposing their own prejudices and view of the world on everyone else? Is this just the successor to that?
It absolutely is that. And, there are huge groups of people, and this point has been well made by Kemi Badenoch and other ministers, who have to use a car because public transport, is very poor in their areas. And, that could be said to be due to, quote, underinvestment in public transport.
But also they wouldn't use it if it was there. That's the thing.
That's another point, is that
it's better to have a car. If people are free to choose, they choose to drive.
They choose to drive. And one reason is, on public transport, it's not always safe. You get obnoxious, threatening people, certain groups of society, elderly people and women in particular. Why should they run a gauntlet? And let's face it, that dimension of British society is getting worse and not better. A lot of people in most of the country need to have a car, And Mark Drayford, another thing he was saying was this moving from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour was only going to add 1 minute maximum to journeys. Well, I don't know if people in Wales do literally drive to their next door neighbours to have a cup of tea, but there must be some very, very short journeys.
Yeah, right.
If
you drive more than a mile, it's going to be more than that.
I do think, again, that the average punter out there beyond the political village here is going to be very attracted to Sunak's rhetoric. I think he'll be under pressure, the Prime Minister, to do more and have more, sort of stauncher measures on this. But again, I look at Labour's polling position, and really all it is at the moment is people hating the government.
Yeah.
And yet midterm, people ask what do I think of the government? I don't like them. Oh, I'll vote for the other lot. But 6 months out from a general election, they ask a different question. They ask, which of these two deeply unsatisfactory groups of people do I least want to control my life?
The lesser of two evils,
different.
I wrote a piece for The Critic on this subject a few months ago called A Nation of Motorists. I was quite excited when I saw Rishi tweeting his new policy saying we are a nation of drivers. Wondered if he'd read it. But in there, I point out that only 2% of journeys in this country are taken by bus. Only 5% of journeys are taken by train. Motoring is overwhelmingly the most popular, literally the most popular in surveys. If you ask people what their opinion is of different types of transport, the car comes top. What then comes bottom? Cycling. With the bus very close behind, right? People hate taking. Nobody, if they're honest with themselves, would ever take a bus if they had the option of taking any other form of transport apart from maybe cycling, right? And I got the response to this from the usual suspects was, that's only because people outside London don't have good public transport. No, it's not. The reason that there isn't much public transport in a lot of the country, I don't not mean anywhere. I mean, there are some big towns that could do with better public transport, don't get me wrong. And the rail service
and the trains, especially like east-west.
I'm not saying it's perfect everywhere, but for very, very large swathes of the country, people don't take public transport because they don't want to, because they want to have a car. They want to have their kids in the back. They've got luggage. They've got all sorts of things. They want to drive to where they're going, not to some station, right, in the city. And Uxbridge is a perfect bit of proof of this, right? Uxbridge is very well connected. It's got great public transport, but the people there were so pissed off about the Sadiq Khan's thing because they actually want to drive.
And then you see on the backwash from the Uxbridge by-election, you have the left saying the Tories have got this wrong. Labour's never won Uxbridge, and so the Tories held their seat. Well, the point is, this is the only seat the Tories have held. They've got something there. There's the germ of some momentum. And I'm not a natural libertarian on most things, but I do wonder if the internal combustion engine and the idea of private cars that people can drive on the highway had only come along now after us having been a public transport nation, the political class would say this is out of the question. What you're saying, you're going to put individual people in charge of a ton of metal and you're going to let them propel themselves along the highway at 30 or 40.
It would be banned.
It would be a complete non-starter. And they would say it's the craziest, most irresponsible thing ever. So to that extent, civil liberties clearly the climate's not great at the moment. I think, again, I know people who live out in the outer zones of London whose cars have been affected. They love their cars, and they've now got a massive grudge against Sadiq Khan and the Labour Party, and I think it's electoral dynamite.
Yeah, but often when I'm debating some of these nanny state issues, people will say, if alcohol was invented now, we'd ban it. If cigarettes were invented now, we'd ban it. Well, apart from the fact that alcohol wasn't really invented so much as discovered, what wouldn't be banned now? What wouldn't be banned if it was invented now? The aeroplane would definitely be banned. The car would anything to do with combustion, anything that created carbon.
And these are all good
things.
things.
That doesn't say anything about cigarettes and alcohol. It just tells you that we live in very puritanical times.
I wonder about
banning things.
The wood-burning stove. Is that too close to Guardian Easter Hearts?
Yes, because when Gove was talking a lot about that, I'm not sure if he actually implemented it in urban areas, maybe. That was sort of suddenly backs went up. But I thought Uxbridge was great. Obviously, Uxbridge is the outer outskirts of Greater London, not really London proper. But there's an awful lot of people, even within London, who need to drive for a living to get around and so on. So it's even the London
If you've got any gear to take around with you, if you're a tradesman of any sort, really, you're going to have to drive. You can't be lugging a whole load of stuff onto the trains. It's as simple as that.
Me again, final plug, I promise. I just wanted to remind you all about our next online supporters-only event, which is on Tuesday, the 17th of October. We're hosting a very special live edition of the Brendan O'Neill Show, Brendan's podcast, and he'll be talking to none other than Graham Linehan, legendary comedy writer and gender-critical warrior. They'll be discussing cancel culture, gender ideology, and Graham's new book, Tough Crowd. They'll also be taking your questions, so you really won't want to miss this one either. The event is exclusive to Spike supporters, so if you're already a member of Spike Supporters, which is our online donor community, thank you very much. Just go to the online hub now to get your ticket. And if you're not already a Spike supporter, now is surely the perfect time to sign up. For just £5 a month, you can claim your free ticket to this event, as well as enjoy many more exclusive perks, including ad-free reading on the site, access to our comment section, and much more. To find out more about Spike supporters and how to sign up, just go to spiked-online.com/supporters. That's spiked-online.com/supporters. But Patrick, let's talk a bit more about the politics of all of this, because it is Tory conference week. By the time people listen to this, it will be well into Labour conference. Where do you see things being at the moment? Well, it's a big question, but the general narrative is Keir Starmer's going to walk it. The Tories are in disarray and given to just pandering to racist conspiracy theorists. There's this kind of triumphalism amongst the Guardian Easter set, the idea that we're going back to politics as usual, sort of pre-Brexit. Everyone's turned against Brexit. What do you see? What do you think is going to happen? Is this really going to be a walkover for Labour at the next election, or do the Tories have a chance? Are the commentators just getting it woefully wrong again?
I think the Tories have a chance, and I think the paradigm is collapsing. Traditionally, with regarding the Tories, the sort of Nick Robinson view is any promotion of conservative policies is, quote, a lurch to the right, which the electorate hate. And, it's the liberal Tories who are the guarantors of the Conservative Party's electability. If that was ever true, I think the tide has completely gone out of that. You have the liberal wing of the Tories, the Tobias Ellwoods and Theresa May brigade, and dozens of others, perhaps even 100 other Conservative MPs. They basically agree with Keir Starmer and Ed Davey about net zero, about foreign aid budget, about asylum policy, about immigration policy, about nearly all the major issues. And the energy, and it's particularly in the area of we're now entering a sort of mega mass migration era with enormously disruptive social impacts that the liberal left won't even contemplate discussing seriously. All the energy and electoral impetus is behind those on, quote, the Tory right. And the grassroots of the Conservative Party wants conservative policies. If you drill down on why 2019 Conservative voters are disenchanted, overwhelmingly they're not switching to Keir Starmer or Ed Davey, Labour, Lib Dem. More of them are actually switching to the somewhat underpowered Reform Party, which doesn't get that much publicity, but ideologically is obviously more to the right. And the biggest lot of them are just sitting on their hands and proposing not to vote. So I think the 100 Tory MPs of the Caroline Noakes, Theresa May, Tobias Ellwood mindset, who are used to thinking of themselves as the electable sensibles, are in fact just blockers. That that their brand isn't strong enough to take the party over, but they're blocking a move to electable Conservative policies. And I think that's why this week in Manchester, Nigel Farage is the new Boris. Nigel Farage is in a position potentially to perform a reverse takeover of the Conservative Party, Canada style, after the next election. If it goes badly for the Tories, I think the Tory party will be in the sort of frame of mind that Labour was when Ed Miliband lost, and they went for the full Corbynista ticket. But I think right-wing Conservative politics in this particular era we're living through now has mass popular appeal. And personally, I think if were Kemi or Suella Prime Minister now, I think they could win the next election very easily. I don't propose that there should be another horrible putsch and coup and more infighting. Obviously, Rishi's the man to take on the election, but I think authentic, red wall orientated conservatism can win.
I mean, you're so right about the Liberal Tories being. I mean, I just think they're the worst tribe in British politics, not least because they're really illiberal. They want to ban everything. And they're absolutely wrong on almost every policy question. We should get some Postbag questions in where our listeners can send in their questions.
Postbag. It's bulging,
Got one here from Mark on Twitter. Do we need space aliens, bold opening, to save us from the insanity of wokeism? Because Salem was only stopped by those outside the madness. There's some big metaphors there. But there is this sense, is there not, that whatever you try and do to stop the creep of gender ideology in schools or any of this sort of stuff, that the march continues regardless? And this is certainly something, Patrick, that the Tories have been kind of upbraided for. They talk a big game about, we're going to issue new guidance for schools to make sure that kids aren't being indoctrinated. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then it amounts to some pretty warm beer at the end of it. Is that going to be an issue for them as well, do you think?
Yeah, and I think you could say in tribute to the woke left that they're more serious about their fanaticism. They don't take the higher paid job in the private sector. They go into the public sector with the express idea that they're on an ethically higher plane, and then they inflict their fanaticism and their groupthink and shame anyone who disagrees with it and set the parameters for office behaviour. And, they pay attention to detail. They fanaticize harder than people on the right who might want to earn a good living before turning their attention to politics. So what we've had, for the last 15 years plus is the right winning the popular vote and then the identitarian left running the public realm.
What do you think, Chris? Is there what could push wokeism back? What is it going to take?
I'm kind of bored of wokeism now.
Just as a topic.
Just try and ignore it. Yeah, it's a topic. They're idiots, and I don't like them. But the public doesn't like them either. Yeah, and Starmer's had to kind of turn his back on them. Rishi's never given them much of a chance. I know they continue their horrible march to the institutions, and I know it's a big problem for some people, but it's not a problem for me because I work at the IEA, and there isn't any wokery here.
Yeah,
but Labour
I just turn my back on it.
Patrick, you've written a piece for us about what Labour are actually planning to do.
Labour sort of launched into Black History Month with, every time it comes around, they let Annalise Dodds out of the cupboard. I assume she's been locked in, and she says what the Labour Party really thinks, and it's staggeringly unpopular. So they're proposing a Race Equality Act, and they're very coy that might be in it. But it's clearly focused on outcome equality rather than opportunity, equality of opportunity. And, there have been various reports in The Guardian to suggest that it's going to be special help for black-led businesses in procuring lucrative public contracts when Labour's in power, stuff about reducing school exclusions, ethnicity pay gap. The new divisive metric that every big company is going to have to compile. And yet there's never a problem in the eyes of the identitarian left when say they don't say why are black men overrepresented in Premier League football, the highest paying industry in the country. So if they're only focusing on areas where the outcomes are worse for the black community. And not where they're better, then it's just going to cause more damage to race relations, and particularly white working class people are going to think, there's nothing down for us at all. And I don't think you could look back on the last 3 or 4 years of BLM and kneeling madness from the Labour Party. I think one Tory MP, I always put it in, Laura Farris, took a knee as well. You can't say that that's improved British race relations. It's done just the opposite.
And even polls suggest that even ethnic minorities in Britain think things have gotten worse as a consequence of all of this.
Yeah, well, they would. The whole point is to make people think things have got worse.
Well, no,
the whole point is stirring up racial.
No, but as in BLM has been bad, essentially.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but I think I'm getting the kind of sense that Keir Starmer has actually kind of stepped back from this stuff. I think is a bit of a red herring, not least because it reminds me exactly of the debate around Joe Biden in the US in the run-up to 2020 election. There were these pieces written by kind of prominent anti-woke liberals saying, if you hate wokeness, vote for Joe Biden because Trump, he just fuels the culture war. Biden is this old guy. He's never read Robin DiAngelo in his life to the extent that he can still read at all. There's all this kind of stuff. Of course, he's not going to do that. Day one, he was signing executive orders about transgender participation in sports. Into the empty vessel was poured all of this stuff. He was issuing COVID relief on the basis of race. That only got held up because the courts got involved. And I think there could be a similar thing with Keir Starmer, not because he's a kind of somnambulant, octogenarian, but because he just believes in nothing. So he will just defer to Doreen Lawrence or whoever it is who might be leading up these kinds of efforts.
All I'm saying, though, is you'll be happier personally if you try to ignore all this.
That's pretty sage advice.
Have a frame of snooker, go down the pub, talk to normal people, and try to ignore it.
So
I realise it's me.
Last orders to steal.
My days as a podcaster could be over with this, but I will find more inner peace by just ignoring it.
I think that's generally quite good advice. Before we go, Patrick, so I know you've got to rush off. There's one question that we ask all of our guests. I think we've introduced it since you were last on the show. Because of the fact this is a very libertarian podcast, we're against banning things in almost all circumstances. But if you had to ban one thing for very petty reasons, so it can't be something worthy, you can't be banning poverty or even wokeism or anything, or bully XLs, already on the map. Something just that really irritates you. To give you an example, Chris, is I forget how many you've had so far, but wheelie suitcases is one bet noir.
Yeah.
I
can't remember what the last one was. Anyway.
Right, the sort of pointless, petty, authoritarian
dictator for the day. What's the first thing to?
I don't particularly like it when people support huge and rich and powerful football clubs with no local or family connection. So there might be a private members bill
to force you to support the team nearest to your
childhood team.
Yes. Oh, the childhood team.
Well, or
whichever team
or a team is in the neighbourhood where you've lived for a long time, or something.
Or your parents used to live there, or something.
Yeah.
Some sort of.
But the legendary, huge Surrey commute every time Manchester United or Liverpool play at home. I think I would maybe ban that on environmental grounds.
Yeah, that's very annoying. I noticed nearly all journalists seem to be Arsenal or Liverpool fans.
Yeah,
like Twitter journalists.
Because Arsenal is an Islington thing, so that makes sense.
Yeah,
right.
Liverpool's
a bit of a generational thing, as in kids of 8, 9, 10 are very ruthless about supporting the most popular and successful team of the time. So the various careerist 40-something journalists grew up at primary school when Liverpool were winning everything, and I think that explains.
As a newborn Worthing fan, I totally agree with you there.
Well, I'm Weymouth.
Much better. Are you?
Well, Cambridge United really, but lately go and see.
There was an article in the Guardian. It's actually getting quite big now, like non-league football. People, particularly Worthing and Lewis. Actually, there was an article in When Saturday Comes about how those two teams in particular are getting people who have moved out of London and are sick of the prima donnas and the prices and all the rubbish of Premiership football. And the Guardian did this article about people who have switched sides. More or less for this kind of reason. But there was only 2 case studies. The first guy used to be an Arsenal fan and now he supports Dulwich Hamlet. That's fair enough, right? You've dropped a lot of divisions there. Good lad. The other one was a guy who used to support West Ham and now supports Brighton. I mean, that doesn't count at all, does it? I mean, you support a better team.
Full foul of the O'Flynn law as well.
You basically just moved from London to Brighton, go, I'll support Brighton. Well, no, you've got to drop down at least 2 divisions.
They're doing quite well. You
can't like 2 teams in the same division.
No,
you support. I support. Yeah.
But again, it's tourists, isn't it? It's football tourism. That's what it's. Which is what Patrick would clamp down on.
Well, it's a glory hunting, really.
Glory hunting is the issue. Got you. But anyway, do listeners let us know if you've got anything to add to this conversation. But Patrick, Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thank you to Beckett's Dry Drink, my favourite drink.
Delicious.
Smooth.
You've been listening to Last Orders. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please do take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. And if you'd like to support the show, why not become a Spiked supporter? Just go to spiked-online.com/supporters to sign up. That's spiked-online.com/supporters.